I don't know why I remember the sound of the clock that night. It was an old wooden thing, hanging crooked on the kitchen wall, something we picked up at a flea market years ago. I had never noticed how loud it ticked before, like a heartbeat, slow and steady. But that night, it was deafening. Corinne sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't taken a sip from. Her eyes were distant, as if she were already somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't. "I need to talk to you," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. 1,000 worst-case scenarios ran through my mind in an instant. Was she sick? Had something happened to her family? But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "I need independence." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She sighed, setting the mug down with a soft clink against the table. "I mean, I feel like I've lost myself in this marriage. I don't even know who I am anymore." I blinked, trying to process her words. "Corinne, what are you talking about? You have your career, your friends, your own life outside of this house. What's changed?" She looked away. "It's not enough." My throat went dry. "So what are you saying? You want a divorce?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I don't want to end things. I need space. I need to figure out who I am without feeling like I have to answer to someone else." Answer to someone else. Like I was some kind of warden instead of her husband. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the woman I had spent over a decade building a life with. The same woman who, until recently, would laugh at my bad jokes, steal my hoodies when she was cold, and rest her head on my shoulder during movie nights. Now, she was talking like I was an obstacle in her way. "Have I done something to make you feel trapped?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's not you, Wallace. It's me." I let out a humorless chuckle. "That sounds like a breakup line." She flinched, but didn't deny it. That's when it hit me. She was already halfway out the door. I felt a slow, creeping dread settle in my chest. "Is there someone else?" Her reaction was quick, too quick. "No, of course not. Lies taste bitter when they come from someone you love." I could have pushed her, demanded the truth right then and there, but I was too tired, too shocked. So, I just nodded, swallowing my pain like a jagged pill. "All right," I said finally. "If that's what you need." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you for understanding." I didn't understand. Not one bit. And deep down, I knew that whatever had broken between us, it wasn't something space would fix. It was something final. The next few days felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. Corinne didn't leave. She still made coffee in the morning, still scrolled through her phone at the dining table, still hummed under her breath while doing dishes. But everything was off. There was a weight in the air, something unspoken sitting between us like a wall. She had asked for independence, yet she hadn't packed a bag. She still slept in our bed. She still called me by pet names, sometimes. But the warmth was gone, like an old light bulb flickering before burning out completely. I wanted to ask what exactly she meant by space. Were we together or not? Was this some kind of trial run for a life without me? But every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. The worst part? She acted like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. One night, about a week after that conversation in the kitchen, I found myself standing in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair, her back to me. She used to talk to me while doing that. I'd sit on the bed, and she'd tell me about her day, about office drama, about what her friend Meredith had done this time. It was our little routine. But now, the silence felt deafening. I cleared my throat. "You working late tomorrow?" She paused for a fraction of a second before resuming her strokes. "No, I'm meeting some friends for drinks." That wasn't unusual, but something in the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. "Who?" She set the brush down. "Just some people from work." "Anyone I know?" Her shoulders stiffened, so slightly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. "You wouldn't," she said quickly, standing up. "It's nothing, Wallace. Just a normal night out." Normal. That was the word she kept using lately. Everything was normal. But I had this sinking feeling that the moment I started believing that, I'd wake up to find my whole life had disappeared. I nodded slowly. "All right. Have fun." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, I lay awake long after she had fallen asleep. My mind was racing, my stomach twisted in knots. I trusted her. Or at least, I wanted to. But trust isn't just a decision. It's something that lives in the quiet spaces of a relationship, in the way two people look at each other, in the certainty that no matter what, they'll always choose each other. And for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't sure she was choosing me anymore. The next evening, she left the house wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. It was shorter than what she usually wore, paired with heels that made her legs look longer. I couldn't help but stare. "You look nice," I said carefully. She beamed, more than she had in weeks. "Thanks." There was something about the way she said it, light, almost giddy, that sent a sharp pang through my chest. She hadn't smiled like that around me in a long time. I watched her grab her purse, slipping her phone inside before giving me a small wave. "Don't wait up." And just like that, she was gone. I stood in the quiet house, listening to the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. The moment the taillights disappeared down the road, something inside me snapped. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed my keys, and did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. I wasn't the kind of man who did things like this. Following my wife. Sneaking around like some paranoid fool. That wasn't me. Or at least, it hadn't been before. But trust isn't something that vanishes overnight. It fades, piece by piece, moment by moment, until one day, you realize you're sitting in your car, gripping the steering wheel, watching your wife walk into a bar she never mentioned before. I parked across the street, my heart pounding in my chest. The neon sign above the entrance flickered slightly, casting a dull blue glow over the sidewalk. It wasn't the kind of place Corinne and I ever went to. Too modern, too sleek, too far removed from our usual routines. She stepped inside without a second thought, her heels clicking against the pavement. I sat there, frozen, debating whether I should just go home and pretend I never saw this. But my gut told me otherwise. So, I got out of the car. I wasn't stupid. I knew I couldn't just walk in and sit at the bar without sticking out. I wasn't dressed for this place. Corinne had spent extra time on her appearance tonight, but I was still in the same jeans and sweater I had thrown on that morning. So I waited. The minutes dragged on, and I felt ridiculous standing there like some kind of private investigator. But then, through the large front window, I saw her. She was sitting at a small, intimate table near the back, a glass of wine in her hand. Across from her sat a man I didn't recognize. I felt something deep in my stomach twist painfully. He leaned in slightly, his elbows resting on the table, his expression relaxed, too relaxed. He was younger than me, probably in his mid-30s, with a sharp suit and an easy smile. The way he looked at her made my blood run cold. Because it was the way I used to look at her. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting back slightly, her hand brushing against his as she reached for her glass. I had seen that laugh before, but not in a long time. The realization hit me like a freight train. I was watching my wife on a date. I had suspected something, but seeing it with my own eyes made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. My fists clenched at my sides. Part of me wanted to storm in there, flip the table over, demand answers. But another part, the quieter, more broken part, just stood there, rooted to the sidewalk, watching as the woman I loved became a stranger right in front of me. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. They talked, they laughed, they touched in small, casual ways that made my stomach churn. And then, just as I thought I had seen enough, Corinne stood up. So did he. And together, they walked toward the back exit. I didn't even think. I moved. I walked quickly around the building, my heartbeat hammering in my ears, my mind screaming at me to stop, to go home, to pretend this wasn't happening. But I had come too far to turn back now. When I reached the alley behind the bar, I saw them. Corinne stood against the brick wall, her arms wrapped around herself as the man leaned in close. I expected a kiss. Instead, he said something too quiet for me to hear. But I saw her expression shift. Her smile faltered. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. He handed her something, an envelope. She took it, slipped it into her purse, and walked away without looking back. I stood there in the shadows, my entire world tilting beneath my feet. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else. Something worse. I stood in the dark alleyway long after Corinne disappeared around the corner, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The envelope, that small, insignificant-looking thing now felt heavier than anything I had ever encountered. What the hell had I just witnessed? At first, I had convinced myself that I was catching my wife in an affair. That she was simply another person in the long, sad history of spouses who got bored, who wanted something new, something thrilling. It would have been painful, God. It would have shattered me, but at least it would have made sense. But this was different. I walked back to my car in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I could still see her standing there in that dimly lit alley, accepting that envelope like it was a transaction. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My mind was spinning, trying to put the pieces together. Who was that guy? A coworker? Someone she met recently? And what the hell was in that envelope? The thought of going home and pretending I hadn't seen any of this made my stomach churn. I knew Corinne. I knew when she was hiding something. And tonight, she wasn't just hiding something, she was burying it. I needed answers. So, for the first time in my life, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through my wife's things. The house was dark when I stepped inside. Corinne wasn't back yet. My heart was pounding as I walked into the bedroom, the air thick with the smell of her perfume. My fingers trembled as I opened her closet, then her dresser drawers. I didn't even know what I was looking for, just something, anything, that would make sense of what I had seen. And then I found it. In the back of the drawer, hidden beneath neatly folded sweaters, was another envelope, identical to the one she had taken earlier. I swallowed hard, my fingers hesitant as I pulled it out. My mind screamed at me to stop, to just put it back and forget all of this, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I carefully opened the flap and pulled out the contents. My stomach dropped. Inside were receipts, dozens of them. Expensive restaurants, hotel bookings, luxury purchases I had never even heard of before. But the worst part? None of them had my name on them. It was like looking into the life of a woman I didn't even recognize. And then, at the very bottom of the stack, I found a handwritten note. Thursday, 8 p.m. Same place. Don't be late. I stared at the words, my hands shaking. I had always assumed that if my marriage fell apart, it would be because of the usual reasons: arguments, stress, maybe even boredom. But this was something else entirely. This was premeditated, planned, and I had no idea just how deep it went. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. At work, my colleagues spoke, but their words barely registered. The world outside moved at its normal pace, but mine had come to a screeching halt. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to find the moment when my wife had started leading this double life. Had it been months? Years? Had I ever really known her at all? By the time I got home, Corinne was already there, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone like it was any other night. I stood in the doorway, watching her, my heart hammering against my ribs. She glanced up at me and smiled. Hey, you're home late. I forced a nod, stepping inside. Yeah, long day. She stretched her legs, setting her phone aside. Want me to heat up some dinner? I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, I'm good. She gave me a look, tilting her head slightly. You okay? You seem off. Off. If only she knew. I sat down across from her, studying the face I had loved for over a decade. The same face that had once been my whole world. And now, for the first time ever, I didn't recognize her at all. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the envelope. The receipts. The note. Thursday, 8 p.m. Same place. Don't be late. It played in my mind over and over again, a broken record of betrayal. Corinne had secrets, ones that went beyond what I had ever imagined. And the worst part? She was still playing her role, acting like nothing had changed, like we were just another married couple going through the motions of life. The next morning, I sat across from her at the breakfast table, my coffee untouched. She hummed softly, scrolling through her phone as she sipped her tea. The same routine, the same small habits I had always found comforting. But now, all I saw was a stranger. I was thinking of going out tonight, I said casually, watching for her reaction. She didn't even glance up. Yeah? Where to? I shrugged, pretending to be uninterested. Just meeting an old friend. Haven't seen him in years. This time she paused. Just for a second. Then she gave me a small smile, as if the idea of me having plans was amusing. That's nice, she said. That was it. No questions. No curiosity. Just disinterest. My stomach twisted. She didn't care where I was going. She wasn't worried about what I was doing. Because in her mind, I wasn't the one she had to hide from. She was. I spent the day waiting, counting the hours until 8 p.m. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I drove aimlessly, my mind racing, my heart slamming against my ribs as I tried to piece everything together. By 7:30, I was already parked a block away from the place written on the note. I didn't even have to check the address. I knew exactly where she was going. The same bar. The The same place where I had followed her before. I gripped the steering wheel, my pulse hammering in my ears. There was still time to leave, to go home and pretend none of this was happening. But I had come too far to turn back now. At exactly 7:55, I stepped out of the car. The night air was crisp, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. I kept my head down as I made my way toward the entrance, my hands shoved into my pockets. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. But whatever it was, I wasn't ready. The bar was packed, the low hum of conversations mixing with the clinking of glasses. I scanned the room quickly, my breath catching when I spotted her. Corinne sat at the same table as before, a glass of wine in her hand. And across from her was a different man. Not the one from last time. Someone else. He was older, well-dressed, his posture relaxed as he leaned in slightly. Corinne smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she laughed at something he said. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't one secret lover, one mistake, one bad decision. This was a pattern, a routine, a life I had never known existed. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I needed more. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. So, I found a seat at the bar, keeping my back to them as I listened. It wasn't hard. She spoke louder when she was drinking, her laughter light and carefree, as if she didn't have a husband at home who was slowly unraveling. It's been so nice getting back into things, she was saying, her voice smooth and confident. I really feel like I've found myself again. The man chuckled. That's great to hear. You deserve this. She sighed. I do, don't I? A waiter passed by, setting a fresh glass of wine in front of her. Corinne thanked him, then reached into her purse. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the envelope. The same kind as before. She slid it across the table, her fingers tapping lightly on the surface. The man picked it up without hesitation, slipping it into the inside pocket of his blazer like it was second nature. This wasn't a gift. This was business. A deal. I had been wrong about everything. This wasn't just infidelity. It was something bigger, something darker. And for the first time, I realized I might not be the only one Corinne had been lying to. I sat at the bar, my pulse hammering in my ears. The glass of whiskey in front of me remained untouched, the ice melting into a diluted swirl. My eyes stayed fixed on the reflection in the mirror behind the bar, on her. Corinne was laughing, sipping wine, brushing her fingers over the rim of her glass in a way I had seen 100 times before. But this wasn't just flirting. This wasn't a casual affair or even a reckless mistake. This was calculated, organized, routine. My mind raced as I watched the envelope disappear into the man's jacket pocket, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I had spent over a decade with this woman, believing in us, trusting her with everything I had. But now, I was seeing something different. A version of her I never knew existed. Who was she, really? And how long had she been playing this game? I waited until the man left before I made my move. Corinne lingered at the table, swirling the last bit of wine in her glass, her expression unreadable. I pushed away from the bar, my legs moving before my brain could catch up. When I reached her table, she looked up, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Shock. Then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, practiced mask she wore so well. Wallace, she said, setting her glass down. What are you doing here? I slid into the seat across from her, my jaw tight. Funny. I was just about to ask you the same thing. She didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed amused. I told you. I was meeting friends, she said, tilting her head. You didn't believe me? I let out a slow breath, my fingers tapping against the tabletop. Who was he? Her smile didn't falter. A business associate. Since when do you conduct business over candlelit dinners? She exhaled, rolling her eyes slightly, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Wallace, I don't know what you think you saw, but I saw you hand him an envelope. I interrupted, my voice steady. Just like you did with the last guy. That was the first time she hesitated. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. You went through my things, she said, her voice softer now. Controlled. I had to. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. Then she sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't find out like this. I swallowed hard. Find out what? She tapped a nail against the side of her glass, as if considering her words carefully. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said, I've been investing. My brows furrowed. Investing? She nodded. private investments. Some high-risk, high-reward opportunities. I frowned. What kind of investments require secret meetings and envelopes full of cash? Her lips curled slightly, as if I had just asked a naive question. Not everything runs through a bank, Wallace. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't an idiot. I knew when someone was dodging the truth. And right now, my wife was spinning a story, feeding me just enough to make me think I understood. I want the truth, I said firmly. All of it. She sighed again, rubbing her temples. Fine, she said. But not here. Let's go home. The drive home was silent. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my mind spiraling through 100 worst-case scenarios. Was she in debt? Caught up in something illegal? Had she gotten involved with people who could hurt her? Or was this just another elaborate way to cover up the truth? We pulled into the driveway, and I killed the engine. Corinne sat still for a moment before finally turning to face me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry, she said. I let out a hollow laugh. You think this is better? Finding out like this? She sighed, rubbing her forehead. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I knew. She wasn't going to tell me the truth. At least, not all of it. I got out of the car and slammed the door behind me. Corinne followed me inside, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Wallace, please. I swear, I'm not doing anything wrong. I turned to her, my chest tight. Then why does it feel like I don't even know you anymore? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. And that silence told me everything. The house felt different that night. Or maybe I was different. Everything looked the same, our furniture, the framed photos on the wall, the soft glow of the lamp in the corner, but it all felt foreign. Like I had stepped into someone else's home. A place that had once belonged to me but no longer did. Corinne moved around the kitchen, pouring herself another glass of wine, as if this was just another night. As if we hadn't just had a confrontation that should have shattered the illusion we'd been living in. But that was the thing about Corinne. She never shattered. She adjusted. She adapted. And that terrified me. I sat down at the dining table, watching her as she leaned against the counter, swirling the wine in her glass. Her eyes flicked up to mine, measured and cautious. I know you're angry, she said finally. I let out a humorless laugh. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it. She exhaled, setting her glass down. Wallace, I swear to you, I haven't done anything to betray you. I clenched my jaw. Then explain. Because from where I'm sitting, I've caught you lying, sneaking around, handing envelopes to strange men in dark bars, and giving me half-truths every time I ask what's going on. She looked down, rubbing her temples. For the first time, I saw something crack in her carefully composed expression. Guilt. Or regret. I wasn't sure which. I needed to do something for myself, she said finally. I frowned. What does that even mean? She took a deep breath, as if she were about to confess something difficult. I've been investing, she repeated, but not in the way you think. I waited. The truth is, I've been helping people. I narrowed my eyes. Helping who? She hesitated. There are women I know. Friends. They needed financial help, loans, things they couldn't get through a bank. So I cut her off. You've been giving them money? She nodded. It's nothing shady, Wallace. I wanted to feel like I had control over something. Like I was making a difference. It sounded noble. Almost believable. But something didn't add up. I thought about the expensive receipts I had found. The hotel bookings. The dinners with different men. I leaned forward. Why didn't you just tell me? She exhaled, shaking her head. Because I knew you wouldn't understand. I stared at her. Try me. She hesitated again. And there it was, that tiny, almost imperceptible moment where I knew she was deciding how much of the truth she could get away with telling me. Finally, she said, these women, they've been through things. Bad marriages, bad situations. They needed a way out. I had the money. So I helped. I let her words settle, turning them over in my head. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Where did the money come from? She didn't answer. My stomach turned. Corinne. She ran a hand through her hair. I've been moving some of our savings around. I felt a slow, sinking dread settle in my chest. Our savings. She nodded. I pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. Are you telling me you've been taking our money, our future, and handing it to strangers without even telling me? Her expression hardened. They're not strangers, Wallace. They're people who needed help. That's not your decision to make. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. She straightened, her posture defensive. I didn't think you'd approve. I let out a hollow laugh. You're damn right I wouldn't have approved. Because this isn't just about you, Corinne. This is our life, our finances. And I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. You just decided I didn't need to know? Her lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't do anything wrong. I stared at her, my chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. I realized then that she truly believed that. She didn't see what she had done as a betrayal. She saw it as something she deserved. She saw us, our marriage, our life together, as something she had the right to manipulate if it suited her needs. And that's when I knew. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. And she had destroyed it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, while Corinne slept soundly beside me. How could she sleep? How could she lie next to me like everything was fine? I didn't know what was worse, the fact that she had lied to me, or the fact that she didn't seem to regret it. I had spent years building a life with this woman, years believing we were a team. But now, I was starting to see the truth. I had been alone in this marriage for a long time. I just hadn't realized it until now. And the worst part? I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. For a split second, my heart clenched, thinking Corinne had left in the middle of the night. But then I heard the sound of the coffee machine humming in the kitchen, followed by the soft clink of a spoon against a mug. I took a deep breath. Last night had been a breaking point. And now, as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the morning light streaming through the window, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. When I walked into the kitchen, Corinne looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Morning," she said, setting down her mug. I nodded. "Morning." The tension between us was thick, but I wasn't going to let it drag me down. Not anymore. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, folding my hands on the table. "I've been thinking." Her lips parted slightly, as if she had been expecting a fight. Instead, I was giving her something much harder. Honesty. "This isn't working," I said simply. Her brows furrowed. "Wallace." "No," I said, shaking my head. "Let me finish." She closed her mouth, watching me carefully. "I spent years believing in us," I continued. "I trusted you. I thought we were in this together. But you don't see it that way. You've been making decisions for both of us, big ones. Without me." She looked away, her fingers tightening around her mug. "I could sit here and try to forgive you. I could try to rebuild the trust you broke," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't want to." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "I love you, Corinne. Or at least, I loved the version of you I thought I knew," I admitted. "But I can't keep holding on to something that isn't real." Silence stretched between us. She blinked rapidly, as if she hadn't expected this. Maybe she had thought I would yell, that I would beg her to fix this. But I wasn't that man anymore. Finally, she exhaled. "So, what now?" I leaned back in my chair. "I think you already know." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw something real in her expression. Acceptance. She wasn't going to fight me on this. Because deep down, she knew we were already over. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, dividing assets, and having the hard conversations neither of us had been ready for before. It wasn't easy. Some days, I second-guessed myself. I wondered if I should have tried harder, if I had given up too soon. But then I remembered the sleepless nights, the lies, the gut-wrenching feeling of realizing I had been in this marriage alone for longer than I knew. And I knew I had made the right choice. A year later, I stood on a quiet beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. It was my first solo trip in years. Just me, a book, and the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I had spent so much of my life trying to make things work, trying to be the husband Corinne needed. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten about myself. Now, I was learning to choose me. I had no idea what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. And that was freedom.